Chapter 7. During the days that followed, Theo would barely look at me, let alone talk to me. I knew that he was probably pissed that I'd had sex with Aidan. Anyone would have been jealous, and he was a werewolf. We were more naturally prone to jealousy when it came to our mates. But he knew the situation. He knew that I hadn't asked to be mated to all of them. Fate had chosen this arrangement for me, and originally they had all agreed to this. They had agreed to share me. I hated that he was mad at me, but I also didn't regret it for even a second. Originally, I had promised not to have sex with any of them until I made my decision. But I had a different plan for myself now. I wasn't going to force it, but when the timing was right, I would do it with the others too. If I was going to choose who I was going to be with for the rest of my life, then I needed to know what sex with each of them would be like. And sex with Aidan? Well, it was everything. On Monday, Jessica passed me in the hallway at school. She smiled at me, but she didn't say anything. I knew it was because she didn't take me seriously, and I couldn't say I blamed her. But I didn't feel ready for her help yet. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't that I didn't want her help. I knew she would be a valuable tool for us to have on our side when it came to hunting Milos down. But we really weren't ready to do this the way she wanted to go about doing it. The Darkin had signed a contract to teach at Werewolf Academy this year, one that they couldn't just go back on. It would be one thing if each of the Darkin took a leave of absence, but they couldn't all ditch their teaching positions at once. Now that school was officially in progress. The only problem was that I wasn't sure how we could go about it now, either. My plan was for us to come up with a plan before we asked her to be a part of the plan. And I wasn't sure how long this plan was going to take. Later that day in advanced paranormal history, Aidan said, "Class, we have a new student with us this afternoon. I would like you all to welcome Lydia." I glanced over my shoulder to find Maddie's roommate Lydia, aka Sarah from the ancient times, sitting towards the door of the classroom. Seemed odd that she had switched classes. Honestly, I didn't really like the idea of being in a classroom with her. Couldn't help but feel like the entire reason she was at Werewolf Academy had something to do with me. I just wasn't sure why. Next, I would like to tell you about a group project that I'm going to assign you today, Aidan continued. We're going to be researching curses and prophecies. I'm going to assign you with a curse and a partner. You'll research the curse or prophecy together and then do a presentation about it. So, I'm going to read off your partners and the curse or prophecy that you've been assigned. He began to call out pairs of names. Iris and Vince were partnered, which was relieving to me. The last thing I would have wanted was to be partners with either of them. Raven Gallagher and Lydia Bowers. The two of you will cover the triangle prophecy. Why the hell would you pair me with Sarah? I asked him through mind speak, glaring at him from across the room. Easy, he replied, glancing in my direction. This group project will force you to interact with one another. Once you've talked to her some more, maybe you'll be able to get to the bottom of this whole thing and figure out why she's here. I found myself sulking. I didn't want to have to interact with her. I just wanted to pretend that she wasn't here and hope that the problem would go away entirely on its own. But nope. My mate was going to force me to talk to her. And we had to research the triangle together. Of all the curses and prophecies, for him to assign us, it was one that directly involved me, one that Sarah knew directly involved me. This was going to be interesting, to say the least. Lydia, and I met in the library for the first time the following afternoon. I found these books before you got here. She laid a stack on the table. Between us, this prophecy doesn't seem to be that popular or that well known, so it seems like there aren't a lot of books on it. These are it. A realization dawned on me then. Why didn't we find these books in the library last year when we were actually trying to find information on them? I thought to Aidan through mindspeak. Because I had the library order these books specifically for this assignment, Aidan explained. Considering the triangle prophecy is so close to coming to fruition, I also thought it was really important for the other students to learn about it. That's the entire reason I decided to give you two this assignment. Gotcha. I thought back to him as Sarah said. So I'm thinking that I can go through these two books and you can go through those too. Okay. I agreed. Ultimately, I knew that we needed to focus on the project. We needed to actually get it done in order to get a passing grade. Of all of my mates, Aidan was probably the toughest when it came to grading. We had to Make sure that we knew our shit about this prophecy, which shouldn't have been too hard for me. The prophecy haunted my life every single day of my life. After all. But what I really wanted to do was just ask Sarah a million questions. Why was she at Werewolf Academy? Why was she going by the name of my biological mother? Of course, I knew that she wouldn't have been honest about any of the answers. The first and only time I had called her out as being Sarah, she had pretended that she wasn't, which of course brought up another important question. Why was she acting like she didn't know me? So what made you switch into this class last minute? I asked her, trying to make small talk as I flipped through the first book's table of contents. I've always been really interested in paranormal history, she said with a shrug. Maybe because you were such a big part of it, you were, after all, Princess's lady's maid, I thought to myself. So I hear that our professor is your mate, Sarah said, her eyes flitting over to meet mine. I nodded. Yeah, he's one of them. One of them. Her eyes grew really wide. You have more than one mate? Oh, I made it to all of the Darkin. I just assumed that everyone at Werewolf Academy already knew that. It had always been such a common topic of discussion that I wondered how she hadn't heard about it. Wow, really? I nodded. Yeah. The Darkin are known to be as ruthless as they come. I snorted. Where did you hear that? Well, rumor has it that during the ancient times they once murdered an entire werewolf navy fleet because one of the sailors gave them a dirty look. I highly doubt that's true. Contrary to what anyone seemed to think about my mates, they were all very mild-tempered for a bunch of werewolves. Don't get me wrong. Theo could be moody as fuck sometimes. Well, all of them could be, for that matter. But most people who I had known back in the human world had bigger tempers than the Darkin did. Even the king and queen hated the Darkin pack, Sarah continued. I knew Sarah wasn't making this up. Aidan had told me in the past that the king and queen hadn't been their biggest fans. As he had put it, they were outlaws, and Cain, who had been alpha during those times, wanted to see how much they could get away with before the king and queen kicked them off Nocturne Island for good. They were always causing ruckus. They were always killing random members of the village, sometimes just for fun, she explained. There was also the fact that the entire Darkin pack tried really hard to marry Princess Fallon. They did. Why was it that none of my mates had ever mentioned this to me before now? Didn't really make sense why they would have chosen to keep that information from me. Unless she was lying. I wasn't really sure what reason she would have had to lie though. Yup. Princess Fallon was actually interested in potentially marrying one of them. Why didn't she? I asked her. The king and queen never would have allowed it. They were set on Princess Fallon marrying another royal. The Darkin never would have been good enough, and it wasn't just because they were peasants. They were powerful enough that the king and queen probably would have allowed it if it wasn't for the fact that they were such ruthless wolves. They couldn't have the future king constantly getting into trouble. They wanted someone better for their daughter. A royal. Princess Fallon had no interest in marrying any of the royals she was interested to, though. I'm pretty sure the fact that the Darkin pack was so hated by the king and the queen made Fallon even more attracted to them, or to the prospect of them. But the queen and king forbade her from ever meeting them, so she never got to know them. Instead, she ended up falling for one of the servants, who the king and queen later had murdered, because a servant wasn't good enough for their daughter. Considering I knew from my memories that the majority of the information she'd just shared with me was true, I had no reason to think she was lying about the Darkin. Inquiring about Princess Fallon's hand in marriage just seemed odd. That none of my mates had ever mentioned it before now. Did Princess Fallon fall in love with anyone after the servant who was murdered? I asked her, testing her knowledge. I knew the answer to that. I had learned it over the summer. If she got the answer right, then I knew she was legitimate. Princess Fallon disappeared from the castle after that, never to return again. I don't really know what happened to her after that. The only thing I do know is that the vampires lied about her death. Princess Fallon is clearly still alive. Well, she had passed my test. There was also something else she had just confirmed for me. She was speaking like someone who had been at the castle as all of this had gone on, someone like Sarah. You seem to know quite a lot about the royal family for a werewolf who was born during this century, I said pointedly. I told you I'm a history buff. She winked at me. I'm going to take these books back to my dorm room so I can get some reading done before my roommate gets back. I already checked out those books so you can just take them. We'll meet up again tomorrow afternoon to share our finds. I nodded. Even though I wanted to see what else Sarah could tell me about my past life, I was also pretty excited to dive into these books about the triangle. The more I could learn about this prophecy, the better. I didn't know everything there was to know yet, but one thing was for sure. I needed to learn everything I could about it before it was too late. Chapter 8. Later that night, Colton was watching The Big Bang Theory in my bedroom as I cracked open one of the books, which was called Ancient Curses and Prophecies, using the past to predict the future. As I flipped to the page where the triangle prophecy was supposed to be, I hoped that there was going to be a lot of good information that I hadn't read yet, but I was afraid that it was going to be everything I already knew about the triangle. There was a picture of a princess's tiara at the top of the page, I assumed to represent Princess Fallon. I began to read. The Triangle Prophecy. One Princess's Nightmare. A prophet by the name of Francisco Eduardo penned the following prediction. During the year of 1524, the triangle would be formed when 3 alpha wolves, all born of 3 of the most powerful ancient werewolf packs or their first generation descendants, kissed the first biologically born werewolf in the world. The 3 of these werewolves will become the most powerful alphas in the world. Despite the fact that Eduardo was an incredibly accurate prophet, experts have long debated whether or not this specific prophecy will ever unfold in the future. Prevents one problem specifically. The first biologically born werewolf in the world was Fallon, Princess of the Werewolves. Princess Fallon, who was born to the late King Francis and Queen Lydia, was murdered by the Winston Coven of vampires, who broke into the royal palace on Nocturne Island. They wanted to take advantage of the princess's unique abilities, which were said to be incredibly strong. Consider she was the first werewolf ever born. According to the legends, Princess Fallon passed away when the vampires drank too much blood from her. But, as we all know, legends are sometimes just that. Legends. Princess Fallon's body was never recovered, and conspiracy theorists believe that it's possible she never died. Some believe she may have escaped to the human world, where she continues to live a normal life, possibly hiding for the real risk of the triangle ever being formed. So, let's explore the hypothetical scenario in which Princess Fallon might still actually be alive and this prophecy will still hold true. There have been other prophecies involving the triangle. One of the most famous prophecies comes from a witch by the name of Ingyu Lee. I frowned, wondering if Ingyu Lee was of any relationship to Professor Mindy Lee. Aidan must have been listening in on my thoughts because his voice filled my head. Yes, Ingyu Lee was a witch who just so happens to have been Professor Lee's great-great-grandmother. I wasn't sure why, but knowing that somehow made Professor Lee's prophecy seem all the more real for me. I continued to read the words on the page. This prophecy came about during the 1800s, when the 3 alpha wolves who formed the triangle kissed the firstborn wolf. There will be a long period of uncertainty. Try as she might, the firstborn wolf will not be able to kill the triangle in time. Trying to kill the triangle before she is ready will only result in her own death. So for that reason she must wait until she is prepared. The only place where the firstborn wolf will ever be able to kill the triangle is on Nocturne Island. Nocturne Island makes the firstborn wolf physically ill anytime she returns, and there is a reason for that. Nocturne Island sharpens the firstborn wolf's powers. The princess is stronger on the island than anywhere else in the world. She will know when she is ready to kill the triangle, but she must act accordingly. Once the triangle is ready, things will happen in a certain order. The fires will begin first, and the war between the paranormal races soon will follow. It is not until the war has already begun that the portal between the human world and the paranormal realm will cease to exist. I swallowed hard, allowing everything I had just read to sink in. The triangle had already been formed, and we were already in this period of uncertainty that the prophecy spoke of. During this period of time I wasn't sure when the war would begin. The only thing I knew was that it would, at some point, begin. I wasn't ready to kill the triangle yet. According to the prophecy, doing so would only kill me in the process, and that was the absolute last thing the world needed, considering I was the only one who could kill the triangle. The only place I could kill them was on Nocturne Island. I had gotten sick every time I went to the island, and now I knew why Nocturne Island made me more powerful. It made a lot of sense. I wished that the prophecy told me when I needed to kill the triangle. It left too much answered as far as that went, but at least I knew the order in which things would happen. I had been so fearful of this war beginning and catching us all off guard, but at least I knew how things would go now. The fires would come first, the war between the paranormal races would follow. Colton laughed so loudly from where he lay on the bed next to me that it interrupted my thoughts about what I had just read. Glancing over at me, he seemed to notice for the first time that I wasn't watching. Do you want to watch something else? I need to do my homework, I said, holding up the book. Oh, right. He smacked his forehead and then went back to watching. Opening the next book, I read from it. The Triangle Prophecy, which was first seen by Francisco Eduardo during the 1500s, has long been a fear of some prophets. Some have wondered why the first biological-born werewolf, Princess Fallon of the werewolves, is the one whose kiss will trigger this war. It is believed that there was a curse placed on the werewolf, one that would cause this. First, it's important for us to take a look at the history of how Princess Fallon came to be the firstborn werewolf. King Francis and Queen Lydia were originally humans. They were the king and queen who reigned over the village of Nocturne Island. The entire village was cursed to become werewolves, but the witch who placed the curse on the island was known to hate the king and queen especially. So, a second curse was also placed, this one involving their unborn daughter. I rolled my eyes. Of freaking course there was yet another curse involving me. The curse stated that the king and queen would give birth to one child daughter who would be the firstborn werewolf. Her blood would be powerful enough to control all of Nocturne Island. From its ground and its winds to its sky and its waters, the island would change based on her emotions. I paused. Was this the reason my kiss with Theo had made the stars fall down all around us? Because the island's sky was able to change with my emotions? Theo had lived on Nocturne Island, and he'd said that the stars had never fallen that way before. It was interesting considering I had never fallen as hard as I had that night either. I continued to read. Her magic would be most powerful on Nocturne Island. Due to the triangular shape of the island, she would also produce a triangle of her own. Her kiss would be powerful enough to create a triangle of 3 of the most powerful alpha werewolves, all of which would be interconnected. There was only one way for the curse to be broken. The princess must marry another werewolf, one of royal blood, before she turns 18. However, this would prove difficult because of the princess's rebellious nature. I swallowed hard then as a realization hit me. All of the visions I'd had about my biological parents had made them seem so horrible, but everything they had done had been for a reason. I had assumed that they were going to force me into a marriage with Milos Santorini because he was a royal just like us. I thought they considered peasants or commoners to be below us, but it hadn't been that at all. The real reason they wouldn't allow me to marry the Nicholas hadn't been because they felt he was below us, or even if they did consider him to be below us, it wasn't the only reason I hadn't been allowed to marry him. They hadn't allowed it because marrying a servant wouldn't have been conducive to breaking the curse. They had gone as far as to murder him because they wanted to stop the war from happening. What I didn't understand was why they hadn't just told me that at the time. Based on my memories, nothing like that had ever been mentioned. Even though I hadn't actually been in love with any of the royal werewolves who they had introduced me to, I was pretty sure that I would have taken one for the team, just to save werewolf and humankind. Being in a loveless marriage seemed a hell of a lot easier than everything I was dealing with right now. I wished I hadn't been rebellious. Not that it was my fault. The curse had caused it. That was why my parents had felt the need to murder Nicholas to prevent me from running away with him. It was why they had locked me in the castle tower to force me to marry Milos Santorini. And yet I had still found a way out. Unfortunately. I suppose that some curses simply couldn't be broken. Sighing, I continued to read the book. For many paranormal historians, the biggest concern about the triangle prophecy has been the fact that the human and paranormal realms, which have always been interconnected, will cease to exist. However, there was another prophecy that was seen by a Claude Brown during the early 1900s that tells us how we can reopen the once the portal has disappeared as a result of the triangle. There will only ever be one way that it can be reopened. This involves the blood of a fire-breathing dragon, the tear of a mermaid, and the dust of a pixie. As I read through that last prophecy one more time, I frowned. Didn't actually tell you what needed to happen with the fire-breathing dragon blood. Mermaid tears and pixie dust. Did you mix them? Do you drink them? Did you do a rain dance with them? This information was supposed to be helpful, but for me it rose more questions than it did answers. With a huff, I shut the book and laid it down on my nightstand. Colton glanced over at me then. Are you okay, Raven? As okay as I can be, considering a war is about to begin because of me. Because of this stupid curse I just read about. It's not your fault. You do realize that, right? Colton asked. I glanced over at him. I guess. No. There's nothing to I guess about. None of this is your fault. His gray eyes met mine. It's just a case of bad luck. Horrible luck, I corrected. Yes, horrible luck, he agreed with a nod, pulling me closer to him. But I can tell you one thing. I'm glad you're here with us. Yeah, I asked as he brought his lips down on mine. Glancing up at me, he nodded. I wouldn't have it any other way. I rested my head on his chest, and I noticed that I could hear his heart beating then. It was in sync with mine. As I listened to our hearts beat together for a moment in time, everything felt pretty freaking perfect. Until I reminded myself that somewhere out there Milos had a charm that could easily stop his heart from ever beating again. All I could seem to wonder was why he hadn't yet. Chapter 9. Sarah didn't end up finding anything different about the triangle than I did. In fact, if anything, she found less than I did. I wasn't looking forward to presenting all of this in front of the class, even though I knew that everyone needed to learn about the triangle so that they could better understand what not just my but all of our futures held. I was also afraid that I was going to slip up in front of everyone. And the Darkin still didn't even want Headmaster Black to know that I was Princess Fallon. Aidan and Theo felt the most strongly about it. They were convinced that keeping this between us was the better thing I could do to protect myself. Wasn't sure if I was right, but I also wasn't going to test it either. So, needless to say, I asked Aidan to let me swap partners with someone, but he wouldn't let me. He felt that I was the best one to deliver this presentation, considering I had the most personal experience with it. That was the problem. Fortunately, the presentation ended up going just fine. I didn't slip up about the fact that I was Princess Fallon, so there was that, at least. Time just seemed like it was moving faster after that. The days faded into weeks and the weeks into months. Before I knew it, November was already upon us. We still hadn't come up with a plan, but only because we couldn't come up with one. After all of the research I'd done about the triangle, we knew that if I tried to kill the triangle right now, I would end up dying too. So basically my entire autumn was a waiting game. We were constantly waiting for the ball to drop, and it didn't. A part of me secretly wished that the fires would just start already, that the war would be close to beginning so I could get rid of them. I wasn't sure what was going to happen from here on out, but the one thing I did know was that our lives were a whole lot scarier knowing that Milos and Iris were still walking this earth. One Thursday in late November, Iris didn't show up for our homeroom class. Part of me secretly hoped that she had decided to finally give up on whatever game she'd been trying to play all semester, but I had a feeling that there was no way I could have been that lucky. No, I was pretty sure she had probably just taken a sick day or something. Later that afternoon, I was almost at the Darkin house when I saw Vince walking behind me. Crap. I started to quicken my pace. He was the last thing I wanted to deal with right about now. Somehow, telling Vince about everything that had happened now was even worse than telling him about what had happened at the beginning of the school year. Because now, I needed to explain to him why I hadn't told him everything then. Too. I had dug myself into a hole, and I wasn't really sure how to unbury myself. Raven, stop. Please. Vince called out. I need to talk to you. My mom died. I stopped in my tracks and then turned around slowly. Are you okay? I will be, but right now what I need more than anything else in this world is my best friend. His eyes met mine. I don't really understand why you haven't talked to me all semester, but we can't go on this way. Please just talk to me and tell me why you seem like you're mad at me. I'm not mad at you, Vince. I get why it must look that way to you, but I've never been mad at you. I promise. I know this has to do with you and Iris more than it does with you and me. But it still feels like you're mad at me, considering you've been dodging you all semester, he said with a sigh. I'm not dodging you. I've just been running from the problem. Well, I need you to stop running. Can we please just go somewhere so we can talk in private? And in case you're wondering, Iris went back to the human world to visit her mom in Savannah today, so we don't have to worry about her interrupting us. Bullshit. Ever since I had found out the truth about Iris, that she was an ancient, I was pretty sure that she didn't even have any family in Savannah. Considering the virus had killed most of the ancients, it seemed highly unlikely that any of her family had survived. In fact, I was willing to bet that Iris had probably gone to visit Milos during every summer and winter break. But I knew he wasn't making up the fact that Iris was gone, considering she hadn't shown up to any of our classes today. It really seemed like she had left. I was sure that she had probably gone off with Milos to devise a plan to kill me, but at least she was out of my hair for now, and I would take any Iris-free moment I could get. As we approached the house, I glanced over at Vince. Do you want to come inside? Hell yeah, I want to come inside, because you have a lot of explaining to do. As I unlocked the door to the house, Vince continued. There's something I need to tell you, by the way. What is it? I glanced over at him. My mom didn't really die. What? You lied to me. I just stared back at him, dumbfounded that he would lie about something so big. I wasn't sure how else to get you talk to me, considering you've been dodging me all year, Raven. So sorry, but not sorry. He shrugged. I just want to know the truth. I deserve to hear the truth. He was right. He did deserve to know why I had been avoiding talking to him like the plague. But now that it was finally time to tell him, nervousness was beginning to take over and a million questions of doubt were flooding my mind. What if he hated me for pushing him away all year? What if he didn't think he would ever be able to forgive me? What if he didn't even believe me? What if he took Iris's side? These were all questions that had kept me up more nights than I cared to admit. This past year. Once we had gone inside the house, I closed the door behind us. So before I tell you everything, I just have to ask one thing. What exactly has Iris told you? She told me that she kissed Theo the day before classes began, and you've hated her ever since. And I get it, Raven. He's your mate. Iris should have kept her dirty paws off your mate. It's like she doesn't understand girl code. It was really fucked up of her, and I've told her that a million times. I've told her that she should apologize to you, but she insists that you'd never forgive her. Is that true? Would you really never forgive her? Vince asked. Well, it is true that I would never forgive her, I replied. But that's not what she did. It's not. His eyes widened. No. What Iris did was far worse than kissing my mate. I paused. Don't get me wrong. I probably would have snapped her neck off if she had kissed Theo or any of my other mates, but that would have been way more forgivable than what she actually did. What could even be worse than kissing your best friend's mate? Vince just looked dumbfounded by this news, and it made me feel sort of bad. He had believed for months that this was all Iris had done to hurt me. Now I was about to tell him the truth. And the truth was that his best friend, my ex-best friend, was a monster. So Iris helped Milos Santorini kidnap me. She helped him keep me as a prisoner in his dungeon for 3 months, and then she tried to murder me. Swallowed hard, glancing over at him nervously. I was afraid that there would be doubt in his eyes or written all over his face, but there wasn't. Iris did what? He just stared back at me wide-eyed, but he didn't seem in disbelief. And so, I told him everything, beginning with the way Milos had managed to get inside my mind and convinced me that he was actually Theo to make me go with him, and ending with the day I was rescued and how I got back home. I told him everything. Every single thing. Once I was done, Vince was crying. And I don't mean just teary-eyed. No, there were actual tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Raven. I'm so sorry that you went through all of this and I had no idea. I'm sorry I let that psychopath let me believe that she didn't do anything hurtful to you. I should have known that you wouldn't have cut me off unless something huge had happened. But most of all, I'm sorry that I couldn't be there for you during your darkest hour, Vince said, shaking his head. I feel so guilty. I could have prevented all of this from happening in the first place too. How? I asked. I was going to come to your dorm suite the day Milos lured you. I was going to give you this painting I made for you last year, but then I figured I would just give it to you when you came to visit Chicago over the summer. He paused. I'm also sorry that I didn't realize that you didn't call me this summer because something was wrong. Vince, it's okay, I told him. I lost touch last summer too, and nothing anyone could have done would have prevented Milos from getting to me. He was determined, and he was going to find a way to convince me to go with him, no matter what. Makes sense. Vince sighed. What are you going to do now? I don't know. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Vince said. I'm cutting off Iris. Is that really a good idea? I don't want to piss her off or make her think I'm turning people against her, I admitted. Well, maybe she shouldn't kidnap people, hold them prisoner and try to murder them. He shrugged. I'll make up some excuse as to why I no longer want to be friends, or I'll just slow fade her. I won't let her think it has to do with you, but I just want you to know that I'll always have your back. No matter what. Thanks. I appreciate it. I paused for a moment. Going to school with Iris has been really hard. I'm always worried about what her next move may be, but she hasn't done anything to bother me yet, and I'm not really sure why that is. Honestly, I'm not sure why she's even here. She's an ancient. You can't tell me she hasn't already gone to a werewolf boarding school before now. The reason is clearly just because of you. Vince paused. What's even more peculiar is the fact that Eric is here too. He's her twin, so if Iris is an ancient, then he obviously is an ancient too. That's a good point, I murmured. I hadn't really given any thought to that before now. Of course, I had already figured out that Iris was only at Werewolf Academy because I was a student here, but I hadn't really given any thought as to why Eric was here. An idea hit me then, just as Vince said, you know what I think you should do? What? I think you should talk to Eric. Vince had completely read my mind. I had a feeling that Eric held the answer to something. I just wasn't sure. What? Chapter 10. I never bumped into Eric on campus, but it didn't take me long to find him. Thought about the first and only time I had run into him and headed back there the following afternoon after classes had ended for the day. Sure enough, I spotted a wave of strawberry blonde hair towards the back of the library. He was hunched over a tall pile of books, slowly flipping through one as I sat down next to him. His light blue eyes flitted over to meet mine, and he looked surprised to see me. Raven. Hi. Hey. Listen, I was wondering if I could talk to you. You want to talk to me? Eric just stared back at me with wide eyes. It took me a moment to realize that he thought of me as some sort of celebrity. After all, he was one of the only people on this campus who actually knew that I was Princess Fallon. Yeah, it's about your sister. Well, I don't know how I can help you there, Eric said, quickly shaking his head. Iris doesn't even speak to me. She's pissed at me. Is it because you followed her here? I asked. He glanced around the library. She's here? I don't see her. I didn't mean to the library. His eyebrows shot up. Then where did you mean? Werewolf Academy. Eric spun a ring, which had a large ruby gemstone set in a thick gold band around his finger nervously. We're both werewolves, Raven. I didn't follow her here. We both needed to our education. But he didn't meet my eyes as he spoke, which confirmed for me that I was right. Eric really had followed Iris here. You can cut the shit, Eric. I know you're both ancients. You both would have received your education long before now, I said as quietly as possible, not wanting anyone else in the library to overhear what I was saying. Even though I knew they were ancients, everyone didn't need to know that. How did you know we're ancients? Iris told me you didn't remember your past life, Eric whispered to me. I figured some things out, I started to say, but at that moment my cell phone began to ring from my purse. Shit. It would be just my luck that my phone would start going off in the middle of a library. I pulled my phone out and then glanced down at the caller ID. It was him. My heart pounded against my chest as I sent the call to voicemail. Listen, I can't talk to you here, Eric said, glancing around nervously. Why? I asked. It's not safe. Iris has people watching me. If she knew I was talking to you about this, well, let's just say that it wouldn't be good for either of us. He paused for a long moment. Let's meet somewhere off campus later tonight. There's this bar. He wrote an address down on a piece of paper and then tore it off for me. Meet me there around 9, okay? Okay, I agreed with a nod. Eric scooped up the pile of books then and gathered his things. As he headed out of the library, I wondered what I would learn later. There's no reason you can't just come with me, I told Aidan as we headed out of the house to meet Eric that night. While I was meeting Eric, Aidan felt that he needed to use an invisibility spell before we met up with him. I just think he'll give you more info without me around, Aidan explained as we climbed into the car. Trust me, Raven. He's been my student now for 2.5 years. He's always been sort of nervous and jumpy around me. Don't want to make him even more uncomfortable. He probably just thinks you'll figure out that he's an ancient, I replied, with a shrug. That or he's just naturally nervous and jumpy, which makes sense. If my sister was a monster, I would be nervous and jumpy too. Whatever the case is, I just think it would be better for me to be invisible. Suit yourself. I shrugged. Just make sure you don't park close enough for him to see you there before you go invisible. Oh, I'm not even worried about that. As he came to a stop sign, he whispered in the witch language, Invisibla. He quickly went transparent. Can you make yourself visible again, please? People are going to think that this car is just driving itself. Self-driving cars are the future, Aidan joked, even though I still couldn't see him. I sank down in my seat, hoping that no one would end up noticing that there was an invisible driver. Relax, Raven. This happens all the time in the paranormal world. Everyone knows you don't have to be visible to be driving safely, Aidan insisted. I still didn't like it, but I tried not to complain too much as we made it across town. Aidan parked the car across the street from the bar where I was meeting Eric, and we both climbed out. We began to walk in the direction of the bar when I spotted him. Headmaster Black. He was heading into a business called Psychic Investigations. It read, serving your investigative needs using our intuition. Okay, isn't that weird? I whispered out loud so that Aidan could hear me. It's really weird. His voice filled my mind. I'm not sure what he would be going in there for. I'm really curious, I admitted. I was probably biased since I didn't like or trust Headmaster Black, but I just couldn't help but think that he was up to no good. I have an idea, Aidan said. I'm already invisible. What if I follow him? Do it. You'll be okay here with Eric? Eric is harmless. If someone else, I knew I didn't need to specify that I was referring to Iris or Milos, happens to make an appearance, I'll let you know. Okay, let me know when you're done, but I'm guessing that I'll be done before you. All right. Love you. Love you too, he replied as I opened to the door to the bar. When I stepped inside, I glanced around for Eric. I saw him sitting at a back corner of the room. I headed to the bar and ordered a pumpkin spice margarita before heading over to his table. Hey, Raven. He shot me a small, albeit nervous, smile. Hey. I gripped my glass nervously. I wasn't entirely sure how to begin this conversation. So, I know you have questions. A lot of questions, I admitted with a nod. I'll answer them as honestly as I can, but I need you to agree to something first. Okay, what? His blue eyes met mine. You can never tell Iris I told you any of this. She ever knew. Well, I'm pretty sure she'd kill me. I promise that everything you tell me will stay between us. Can I see your phone? He asked. I shot him a funny look and then pulled my phone out of my bag. I handed it to Eric and he laid it on the table. I just wanted to make sure you're not recording me. Even though I semi-thought he was being paranoid, I also understood. With a twin as batshit crazy as Iris, I'd have been paranoid too. We can leave it out if it makes you feel more comfortable, I suggested. That would be great. His eyes met mine again. So you want to know why Iris and I are both going to Werewolf Academy? I nodded. Yeah, that seems like a good place to start. Milos and Iris have known each other since ancient times. She's in love with him, Eric explained, glancing over at me. Actually, in love might not even be the best way to put it. She has an unhealthy obsession with wanting to be with him. But, as I'm sure you already know by now, Milos isn't interested in her because he's in love with you. Yeah, I knew about all of this. Milos and Iris have long known that the two of them would be a part of the triangle. How did they know that? Easy. They're both born of two of the most powerful werewolf families. I didn't even know Iris was an alpha. How is that possible when she's always here? I asked him. Easy. Every alpha has a beta, he explained. Her beta fills in for her most of the time, but before she does anything she has to have Iris approve everything first. So, basically she's still alpha just from a distance. And I doubt she likes being an alpha from afar, but they've been making it work. Just so that she can come to the academy. The thing about Iris is that she's extremely loyal when it comes to Milos. She would never do anything to let him down, and in case you haven't already figured it out, Milos is the one who sent her here to keep an eye on you. But Iris started this school at the same time as I did, I replied with a frown. And that wasn't by coincidence. Milos has werewolf friends who work at the academy. When he found out that you were enrolled, he came up with a plan. Have Iris enroll as a student, which they were able to accomplish last minute, thanks to compulsion. From there the plan was simple. All she had to do was befriend you and keep an eye on you. She would report everything she learned about you back to Milos and ultimately would help bring him closer to you. But that wasn't necessary when Milos is able to tap into my mind, I pointed out. He just felt better about having someone here who could watch you every day, someone who could ask all the right questions to learn about you, who you didn't even suspect wasn't on your side. It was genius, really. It was all with one goal in mind, to lead you one step closer to him. Well, they made that happen. They kidnapped me over the summer, I informed him. I know. I would have tried to stop it from happening, but I couldn't. And for that I am deeply sorry. What do you mean you tried to stop it? I just stared back at him, sort of confused. Iris told you it was happening? No, she didn't tell me it was happening, but I always try to keep an eye on you. The entire reason I enrolled at Werewolf Academy was to try to keep an eye on you, Raven. I followed you pretty much everywhere you go. My eyebrows shot up. How is that even possible? I never see you any place I go. Sometimes I use invisibility spells to remain hidden. My sister is a monster. Raven. I figured you would need some protection from both her and Milos, and I was right. I've tried to watch out for you ever since your first day at Werewolf Academy, and the day Milos lured you to those woods to kidnap you was no exception. But there was something that happened that prevented me from rescuing you from being kidnapped, Eric explained. Iris has long known that. One of the main reasons I'm a student here is to protect you. So to get me away that day, she told me our aunt died and convinced me that both of us needed to go back to Savannah. Wait, there's actually an aunt in Savannah? I asked with raised eyebrows. He nodded. Yeah, our Aunt Geraldine. She was an aunt who lived in the human world at the time of the virus, so she was able to survive even when most of the ancients didn't, he explained. The thing is, she's still very much alive. That was all just a ploy for Iris to get me out of here so that Milos could kidnap you without me trying to stop it from happening. Of course I didn't realize that at the time. Not until it was already too late. Wow, I murmured. That's okay. Don't worry about it. I appreciate you even coming here to look out for me. I'm not sure if he told you this, but you were rescued because of me, Eric told me then. He glanced around as if he was nervous that someone was listening. I'm the one who let him know you needed rescuing. My eyes widened. Really? He never mentioned that. In fact, the truth was that I had never even really considered how my rescuer had known that I needed rescuing. Yeah, he replied with a nod. He hesitated for a moment. There's something else too. What is it? I asked. You might not know this, but Milos didn't kill your parents. What? At first I stared back at him completely dumbfounded, but then I let out a little laugh. Of course he did. No, Raven. I know you've believed this all along, but you're wrong. I can tell you for a fact that Milos didn't kill your parents. How can you be so sure? I asked him. Because Milos was with me and my sister the day your parents were murdered. We were in Wolflandia. He wasn't anywhere near Pennsylvania or your parents. The look in Eric's light blue eyes told me he was telling the truth. Milos Santorini really hadn't killed my parents. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of this all. But if Milos didn't kill my parents, then who did? I don't know, Eric replied, shaking his head. I didn't know either, but one thing was for sure. I was determined to find out. Chapter 11. As I left the bar, so many thoughts and emotions were swirling around inside my mind. Knowing that Milos hadn't killed my parents was a total game changer. I had spent the last 2 years fully believing that he had killed him, that he was enemy. Don't get me wrong. After kidnapping me and keeping me locked away in his dungeon for 3 months like he had, there was no doubt that I still considered Milos was my enemy. That was all unforgivable. But knowing that he hadn't actually killed my parents made me hate him slightly less. I just wasn't sure who else would have wanted to kill them. I was so shocked by this information that Eric had given me that I had completely forgotten about getting in touch with Aidan. Are you finished with Headmaster Black yet? I asked him. I have so much to tell you. He's getting ready to leave in a few seconds. I'll follow him out the door. When he opens it, Aidan replied right away. Okay. I just stood there waiting for him for a few moments. Realizing that I probably looked like I was waiting for someone, I pulled my cell phone out and texted Vince. I just met with Eric. I learned so much. Just as I hit send, Headmaster Black strolled out of the psychic investigations building. I glanced down at my phone, pretending to be reading something as he got closer. I didn't think he was going to actually say anything to me, but then he moved out of his way to stand in front of me on the sidewalk. Miss Gallagher, aren't you out fairly late for a school night? Headmaster Black asked. I was unaware that we had a curfew, I told him. Well, we don't, but I just figured that someone like you would want to be home studying. I was reviewing your grades recently and it looks like your GPA is beginning to drop. I wouldn't want these late-night rendezvous to interfere with your academic career. Thank you for your concern, I said sweetly. Someone has to be concerned about you, Miss Gallagher. The headmaster stared at me for a moment longer. I also find it rather surprising that you're out all alone. For someone who claims that another student tried to kill her, you seem to feel safe enough to go out at night. It took everything in me not to snarl at him. Unless perhaps you're not alone, the headmaster continued. Maybe one of your mates is nearby. How does he know? I thought silently to Aidan. Out loud I just shook my head. Nope. It's just me. Well, Miss Gallagher, you really should be careful when you're out here all alone. I certainly wouldn't want anything bad to happen to you. Then without saying another word, he turned away from me and set off in the direction of his car. I watched as he climbed into a black sedan. He just sat in the parking lot, not too far away from where we were parked. Don't say anything to me until we reach my car, Aidan told me. He can't know you're with me. In fact, you're driving. I don't even know how to drive, I insisted. The darken had sort of ripped me out of the human world before I'd even had the chance to learn. Don't worry. It's just like riding a bike, Aidan said as we headed in the direction of the car. Not that I could see him. I just assumed that he was moving in that direction with me. You never saw this girl ride a bike. It was a pretty scary thing. As we approached the car, I said, how can I open the car if I don't have the keys? And you can't give them to me without Headmaster Black seeing you give them to me. Put your hand inside your purse to act like you're touching the keys, Aidan said. I'll unlock the doors. Open the car door and let me in before you. Once we're inside, I'll give you the keys. I did as he said, putting my hand inside my bag. A second later, I heard the sound of car doors beeping as Aidan unlocked them. As I opened the car door, I glanced over my shoulder at where Headmaster Black was sitting in his parked car. He was staring in my direction. Because him staring like that isn't creepy as fuck or anything, I said, pretending to drop my purse on the ground, hoping that explained why I was leaving the door open but not getting inside the car. A few moments later, I stood up again and then slipped into the driver's seat, closing the door behind me. Okay, I'm dropping the keys now, Aidan informed me, and a moment later, the keys fell to the floor of the car. I reached over and picked them up. Then I turned them in the ignition, revving the car to life. I turned on the headlights. You know which is the gas pedal and which is the brake, right? Aidan asked. The gas pedal is on the right, I said confidently. Bingo. You're going to want to put the car into drive. And the emergency brake. I have driven a car before, just not much. But why are you even trusting me to drive this car when I none know of this? I asked. Because you've done far harder things than drive a car, Raven, Aidan replied. Now drive. If you sit here for too long, Headmaster Black is going to start wondering what's going on. Do we care what Headmaster Black has to think? After everything I just learned about him tonight, we should care. Headmaster Black is not a good werewolf. Please tell me that's not the first time you're realizing this, I said. As I slid the gear into drive, I gently tapped my foot on the gas pedal. You're doing just fine. Pull out of the parking lot and then give it a little more oomph when you pull out onto the street, Aidan instructed. As I made it out of the parking lot, I hit the gas pedal a little harder. I'm driving. I'm actually driving, I commented. You know, I was supposed to take driver's ed during my senior year of high school, but then Somebody ripped me out of the human world and brought me here. You know you're glad we did that. Just admit it, Aidan said. I wouldn't have it any other way, I thought with a smile. Glancing in the rearview mirror for the first time, I realized that we weren't alone. The black sedan was right at my tail. Headmaster Black is following us. Turn left at the next stop sign, Aidan said. There's absolutely no reason he'd have to take that road to get to his own living quarters, so if he follows us, then we know he's actually following us. I turned on my blinker before we hit the stop sign. I watched as Headmaster Black's blinker indicated that he was turning left too. He's totally following us. Okay, well, I was going to make myself visible soon, but clearly I can't do that until after we get home. He must be following you to find out for sure if one of us is with you. He clearly realized someone was invisible in there, and then he saw you, so he must have put 2 and 2 together. Probably shouldn't have followed him, but I'm really glad I did. It makes me think of him completely different now. Was what you learned really that bad? I asked him. You don't know the half of it. This shit is crazy. Well, I would know if you just spit it out already, I replied with an eye roll. I really want to tell you everything, but I'd rather wait to tell the others too. Besides, you need to stay focused on getting us home without crashing. Even if we do get into accident, it won't kill us. We're werewolves. Remember? I asked as I turned onto the road that would lead to the darkened house. Yeah, but Theo would be freaking pissed if you crashed the car. It's his baby, you know. Why is that anyway? Theo doesn't strike me as the type who gets caught up on material possessions. In fact, in comparison to the rest of my mates, Theo seemed like he enjoyed the simple things in life the most. He bought this car the day his best friend died, Aidan explained. So, for that reason, the car has a lot of sentimental value to him. I didn't even know Theo had a best friend who died. Apparently I hadn't known my mate as well as I thought I did. I thought his pack members were his only close friends. I suppose that was naive of me to think. An eternity was a really long time to just be friends with 3 people. Of course he'd had other friends. Yeah, her name was Fawn, he replied just as I pulled the car into the long driveway. How did she die? I asked. She was killed, as werewolves usually are. I watched as Headmaster Black's car pulled around up the street. We waited for a few moments. He made a U-turn and then pulled off the street, slamming his car into high speed. He's gone. I breathed a sigh of relief. I'm still going to stay invisible until I'm in the house, Aidan replied. I'm afraid that if he finds out the truth, if he realizes that I was there with him, he'll kill me. As I held the driver's side door open for Aidan to climb out, I heard the sound of a car speeding down our street. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw the Headmaster's black sedan again. A knot tightened in my stomach. Whatever Aidan had overheard, it must have been freaking huge. Why else would the Headmaster have been trying to catch us off guard? Chapter 12. So what did you find out? Theo asked as we all sat in the living room. This shit is seriously disturbing. I can't even believe this guy is Headmaster. Aidan shook his head. Aidan, what did he do? I asked gently. He's been killing students. What? That was the absolute last thing I had been expecting him to say. I hadn't trusted Headmaster Black in a really long time, and I thought he was capable of a lot of shady shit. But I honestly never would have guessed that killing students could have been one of those things. The surprise that I felt was mirrored in Colton's eyes. Who did he kill? Megan Thornby, Charles Rover, and Addison Hickey, Aidan replied. I'm a little confused. If this is all true, Theo began, but Aidan interrupted him. It is true. I heard him say it with my own ears. Okay, but if he killed those students, then why is he just telling this psychic investigation agency? Considering how corrupt all of this is, don't you think he would just keep it to himself? Why risk getting caught? Theo asked. Because this is crazy, Aidan said, shaking his head. I could tell that there was a lot about this that he wasn't revealing yet. Tell us everything. Yeah, start from the beginning, Theo agreed with a nod. Okay, so I followed him into this place, right? He had an appointment with this psychic investigator. Her name was Pauline. She's apparently part fae, part witch, so the intuition runs really strong in her genes. I guess she really knows her shit, he explained. So Headmaster Black starts to tell her about how he's been killing students so that he can drink their blood and Become more youthful. What? Does that actually work? This wasn't something we had ever learned about in class. It requires some lunar magic, but yeah, drinking the blood of someone who's younger than you can help you maintain your youth, Reese replied with a nod. It can also make you stronger, Colton added. Ew. I felt sick to my stomach. It was as if we were in the real-life version of Hocus Pocus, except I would have much rather taken my chances with the Sanderson sisters than I would have with Headmaster Black. Anyway, Headmaster Black has been killing these kids and burying their bodies in the Deadwoods. Well, he got an anonymous letter from someone letting him know that they were onto him and that if he doesn't do what they say, they'll expose all of his secrets. He wouldn't tell Pauline, but I get the feeling that this person has a lot of shit on him, secrets that could completely destroy his career. Because killing kids to drink their blood to become younger isn't enough to destroy his career, I said sarcastically. Anyway, Headmaster Black went out to the Deadwoods the other night and he found out that whoever wrote these letters actually dug up the bodies of the kids he'd murdered. So the threat is real and in his mind serious. He paused. The reason he's seeing Pauline is to try to figure out who is sending these letters. Who knows his secrets? It's all very intriguing, but it's all very, very twisted. So I guess you were right all along, Aidan said, glancing over at Theo. We definitely can't trust Headmaster Black. I'm actually a little bit nervous about Raven now, Theo murmured. Why are you nervous about me? I glanced over at him, sort of confused. Think about it, Raven. If Headmaster Black was going to drink blood from any werewolf in an attempt at becoming more youthful, who do you think he's going to want to drink from? A marked? Probably not. A Lupin? I mean, maybe, but a descendant is obviously the most preferable option. But what if you can have a descendant that's superior to all of the other descendants? I'm part Crescent too, I reminded him. Everyone always seemed to forget about my second house, the house that meant I wasn't a good wolf. It was something that still confused the hell out of me, but there was no changing the fact that I had been sorted into both houses at Werewolf Academy. The Crescent part is pretty insignificant here. My point is, what if you can drink the blood of the first biological-born werewolf, the first werewolf to have ever existed? Wouldn't you choose that? Actually, I'm not sure. I mean, listen to what you just said. That doesn't even make sense. Why would he drink my blood to become more youthful when I'm obviously significantly older than he is? I pointed out. You're also significantly more powerful than he is. Drinking your blood could help him acquire powers that he could only dream of, Theo explained. Knowing that this is what he does just makes me nervous. I don't want you to spend any time around him. Well, I really don't think you have anything to worry about because I don't spend any time around him. I avoid Headmaster Black like the plague. Good. Besides, I don't think Headmaster Black is going to try anything when he knows that we're pretty much her guards, Colton added. He'd have to get through us to get to her, and he knows that. Yeah, he knows that any of us would die to protect Raven, Reese added. Yeah, good point. Theo looked slightly relieved by the idea, but I could tell that it wasn't enough. The idea of Headmaster Black drinking my blood still made him really nervous. He wasn't the only one. I wanted to stay the hell away from Headmaster Black. Like never before. I'm never going to be able to look at him the same way again, Aidan said, with a shudder. I can't say it surprises me. I've long thought that Headmaster Black couldn't be trusted, Theo replied. Anyway, I need to tell you guys about my meeting with Eric tonight, I told them. I learned some things. Milos had Iris enroll in Werewolf Academy to keep an eye on me. Well, I could have told you that, Reese said. I know that's not exactly groundbreaking news, but there are some other things I learned too. For starters, the reason Eric came to the academy himself was to keep an eye on me and protect me from Iris. There really is an aunt in Savannah. I noticed that my mates didn't seem overly impressed with my breaking news yet. That was why I was saving the craziest thing I had learned for last. And there was the biggest thing I learned, the thing that will shock you the most. What is it? Colton looked intrigued. Milos Santorini didn't kill my parents. Like hell he didn't, Theo argued. Eric says both Milos and Iris were with him the night my parents were killed, I explained. I highly doubt he would lie about being her alibi if he wasn't really there. Unless he's trying to protect her, Theo insisted. I shook my head. No, there's no way. Iris and Eric have never had a good relationship. He even called her a monster tonight. She knows how she is. I'm positive that there's no way he would try to protect her. So, if Milos didn't kill your parents, then who did? Aidan asked. That's what I want to figure out. Of course, I had no idea where to even begin. At that moment, our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Who the hell could that be? Aidan asked, glancing down at the time on his cell phone. It's almost 1 a.m. on a school night. I wasn't sure, but of course the worst-case scenario entered my mind. What if it was Headmaster Black trying to prove once and for all that Aidan had actually been there and invisible with him today? And that was the absolute last thing we needed. Now that I knew just how serious all of this was, I was pretty sure that Headmaster Black wouldn't have hesitated to kill Aidan if he had proof that he'd been spying on him. But when Theo opened the door, it wasn't Headmaster Black. It was Iris. Chapter 13. My heart pounded against my chest as Iris stood there in the doorway. What the hell are you doing here? Theo asked, letting out a low growl. Knew he couldn't control it, but I wished that he would have been a little less confrontational with her. She was one of the 3 most powerful alphas in the world, after all. Meanwhile, there wasn't a single alpha wolf in this room. I wasn't sure if any of us were strong enough to take her on right now. I'm sorry. I know it's really late and I probably shouldn't be here. Damn right you shouldn't be here, Theo agreed. But I really need to speak to Raven, Iris continued. Would it be possible for me to talk to her? I knew that she could see that I was standing just feet behind Theo, but she was acting like I wasn't even there. In case you haven't figured it out yet, you're not welcome in this house, Theo informed her. And I understand that. I even get why you wouldn't want me here, considering everything. But I really need to talk to her. Please. There was an urgency in her voice unlike anything I had ever heard before, at least not since they'd kidnapped me. The Iris who stood in front of us was a completely different Iris. Somehow, she suddenly seemed so fragile, so vulnerable, so weak. It was all extremely out of character for her. It was so strange to see her acting this way after everything that had happened over the summer. I honestly wasn't sure how to feel about it. I was angry that she was here. I was afraid that she was going to try to hurt one of us. And yet I felt something else too. Sympathy. How could I feel sympathy for someone who had held me captive for so long? For someone who had actually tried to murder me? The way I felt didn't make any sense to me. I had to be firm. I had to stand my ground. Iris shouldn't have been here, no matter what the reasoning was. I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her. If I hadn't been rescued right in the nick of time, I wouldn't have even been here. Good night, Iris, Theo said, beginning to close the door, but she threw her hands up and then turned to me. Wait, Raven, please. I'm begging you. There was a desperate look in her eyes, one that I'd never seen before even when we were friends. And that was when my curiosity took over. Of course, I didn't want to talk to her. The idea of talking to her made me feel sick to my stomach, in fact. But I also wanted to know why she needed to talk to me so bad. Okay, what is it? I asked her. Can we talk in private? She asked. Nope. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my mates too. I thought that was really fair, all things considered. I was willing to hear her out, but I definitely wasn't willing to be alone with her. I wasn't stupid. Fine. Iris sighed. There's no easy way for me to say this, but I really need to reach Milos. He's not answering his phone and he's not texting me back. I'm afraid that something might have happened to him. I know that he's able to communicate with you mentally even when you're not trying to communicate with him. So, I just wondered if you could give him a message for me. I tried to suppress an eye roll. Call me crazy, but there was a tiny part of me that had thought that maybe, just maybe, the reason she had come here was to apologize for the way she had betrayed me. But nope. All she wanted to do was connect with my captor. She's in love with him, I reminded myself. Love is incredibly blinding. You know, you have some audacity to come here asking Raven to do that for you. After everything you did to her, Aidan said, shaking his head. You're downright insane to think this is even remotely acceptable, Theo. Agreed. Yeah, you helped keep her prisoner and now you want her to help you communicate with the guy who held her captive. Colton shook his head angrily. Are you out of your damn mind? Reese added, which shocked me. Of the 4, Reese had always been least likely to swear. I get it, you guys. I really do. I'm sorry I asked. Iris looked completely defeated. I wasn't sure what it was that came over me then. I wasn't sure why I felt any form of sympathy for her, but I did. Whatever reason Iris was trying to get in touch with him, it must have been really bad for her to ask me for help. So as she turned away I said, Iris, wait. What message do you want me to give him? Her eyes met mine with a look of surprise and relief. She definitely hadn't thought that I was going to be willing to help her out. After the way my mates had reacted to her request. Can you let him know that his kid is in danger? Iris asked. Wait, what? Jessica is in danger. My pack members shifted in their shoes uncomfortably. I could tell that they were ready to help Jessica out. We all were ready to help her out. No, not Jessica, Iris replied, shaking her head. His son, Matthew. That was when Milos's black eyes appeared in my mind. What happened to Matthew? A shiver crept down my spine at the sound of his familiar voice. I glanced over at Iris. He wants to know what happened to Matthew. He's in a situation. She paused for a long moment. Tell him to call me. Tell her that I'll call her just as soon as I am done with my meeting with the Winston Coven, Milos responded. He said he'll call you as soon as he's done with his meeting with the Winston Coven, I repeated. This whole situation was just a reminder that Milos was always able to tap into my mind, something that made me extremely nervous. I completely hated it. So, his meeting with the Winston Coven is more important than his own son? Iris scoffed. I waited for a few moments, but Milos didn't say anything in response. He's not answering. Great. Figures. She sighed. Thanks for trying. Iris's eyes flitted over to meet mine. You know, I'm pretty jealous that you're able to communicate with him so easily. Here I am, just trying to give him a message about our kid, and he won't even answer the phone. Wait. Your kid? Yup. Matthew is our son. He's 22 years old. He goes to college back in Georgia. He's always getting himself into trouble, which is unsurprising for a werewolf who's never attended the academy, but he was very firm on his decision not to go, since Mom would be going at the same time. You know how that is. She chuckled. I just stared at her, realizing what a stranger she was to me. I had known that Iris was full of secrets, but I hadn't realized that her secrets went this far. It was almost hard to believe that this one could have even been true. The Iris who I saw standing in front of me seemed like she couldn't have been more than 18 years old, even though I knew she was much older than that. But due to the fact that werewolves barely aged a day, it made it hard to picture her as anyone's mom, let alone a 22-year-old's mom. Wow, I had no idea that you and Milos had a child together. Not even once during my time in the dungeon had I heard any mention about Matthew, let alone the fact that Iris and Milos had a child together. How hadn't I known this before now? Why hadn't Eric thought to mention this during our meeting earlier tonight? Was it possible that even he didn't know that Iris and Milos had a child? Don't act too surprised, Raven. You might not realize this, but there are a lot of things you don't know about me. Some of things you didn't care to know about me, but most of them I chose to keep from you. I'm a woman of mystery. Her lips formed a smile. But maybe this will explain some things for you. Always put my family first. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she didn't. Anyway, thanks for helping me. I really appreciate it. More than you'll ever know. Her eyes moved away from me, and she glanced to each of my mates. I'm sorry to have bothered all of you. Have a good night. Without saying another word, she disappeared into the dark night. Chapter 14. After Iris left, most of my mates all went their separate directions. Colton and Reese went to bed, and Aidan was going to work on the new motorcycle he'd bought in the garage. Do you want to go for a swim? Theo asked me. Sure, why not? Let me go upstairs and change into a bathing suit. There's no need for that. His bright blue eyes locked on mine. I'd much rather swim with you naked. Oh yeah? I asked. He nodded. Come on. Opening the back door, he led me out onto the patio where he proceeded to pull his clothes off. Kicking my shoes off, I glanced over at him. He was completely naked now, and it was hard not to notice how much more toned he was in comparison to last year. His abdominal muscles were way more defined, and his arms just looked so much stronger. Even his butt looked more toned. Have you been working out? I asked with raised eyebrows. Yeah, he replied with a nod. I swallowed hard, trying not to drool. I'd always been attracted to his body. But hot damn. Since when? All semester, he replied. Why? The slightest hint of jealousy came over me. I wondered if he was trying to get hotter just in case I didn't end up picking him. Maybe he was trying to become more dateable. The idea of Theo dating anyone made my heart hurt a little. The idea of him, or any of my mates for that matter, with someone but me actually made me want to break down into tears. And this was a big part of why I hadn't chosen, of why I couldn't choose. I realized once I chose, once my decision was made, I would have no choice but to deal with these feelings head on. We're getting ready to go to war, Theo reminded me. I need to be ready to fight once the time comes. Oh, well, that made a lot of sense at least. Once I had completely stripped out of my own clothes, I glanced up at him and found that his bright blue eyes were scanning the entire length of my body. I felt like a supermodel when he stared at me that way. There were still times when I couldn't help but wonder why Theo, or any of my mates, wanted me. Sure, I was a princess, but appearance-wise I was plain average at best. But they were all sexy as fuck. His eyes only continued to drink me in, lingering on every inch of my body. Was like he was in a trance. Let's swim, I suggested. Theo's eyes moved up to meet mine, and he nodded. All right. I ran forward and then dove headfirst into the deep section of the pool. From underneath the water, I heard the surface breaking as Theo followed after me. When I swam upwards, he was already hanging out on the side of the pool. My long blonde hair was slick from the water. It clung to my bare chest as I swam over to him. You look like a sexy mermaid, Theo said, his blue eyes, which sparkled under the light of the full moon, locking on mine. You know, minus the whole seashell bra or fins thing. But otherwise, you're my sexy mermaid. I laughed. I wish I was a mermaid. I bet that would be a lot easier than being the princess of the werewolves. Maybe, but then you wouldn't be mated to me. He paused and then quietly added, or any of us. Yeah. I could already see that this conversation was going in a direction I didn't want it to go in, so I quickly changed the subject. So Aidan mentioned something tonight that I never knew about you. Oh? What was Aidan running his mouth about now? Theo asked. He told me about Fawn. I see. Theo's eyes darted away from mine. It was clear that this was still a painful subject for him. I'm sorry. Maybe I shouldn't have brought this up. I quickly apologized, suddenly feeling like an asshole. No, you have nothing to apologize for. You were bound to find out about Fawn. Eventually. He paused for a moment. What did Aidan tell you about her? Exactly. That she was your best friend and that she was killed. Okay. Theo let out a deep breath. So all of that is true, but, he trailed off as if he was trying to put something into words. Fawn was more than just a best friend, Raven. What was she? I raised my eyebrows. My fiancé. Oh. I glanced away from him. For some reason this took me completely by surprise. I thought you had never been in love before me. That would be correct, he replied with a nod. But you were engaged. That means you were in love with someone before me. No. I loved someone before you, but you are the first and only one who I've ever been in love with, Theo corrected. Fawn was my best friend. I cared deeply for her. I loved her the way I would love any friend, but I was never actually in love with her. I frowned. I thought an ancient could only be attracted to another ancient. He nodded. That's correct. So you were engaged to her, even though you weren't attracted to her? Question, trying to understand the situation. I knew I couldn't be jealous. The girl was dead after all, but it didn't really make sense. I wouldn't say she was ugly. She was pretty, but the type of attraction I've felt towards non-ancients has just never compared to how I feel about you. Theo explained. Our connection is out of this world. Our bodies are like magnets. I have never felt that with a non-ancient, or anyone else ever. I believed he was telling the truth. I just don't understand. Why would you have been engaged without the sort of connection we have? For starters, my odds of finding this sort of connection seemed unlikely. As far as we knew, there weren't supposed to be any other ancient females left. He paused for a moment. I also always hoped that I would meet my mate one day, but after a few hundred years I had given up hope. I was tired of being lonely, and it was more than that. I wanted a wife, a child, a family, so I was willing to settle and be with Fawn because we had a strong emotional connection, but not much of a physical one. I understood what he was saying. I just didn't like it, and it wasn't because I was jealous. No, it was just strange to think that there was this whole other side of him, this whole other life he'd lived before me. And even though I had known him for 2 years now, I was only just learning about this part of his life now. It made me wonder what other things there about Theo that I still didn't know about. What other things didn't I know about not just him but all of my mates? Raven, can I ask you a question? Theo asked. I had a feeling that I already knew what he was going to ask. Who was I choosing? That was the absolute last thing I wanted to talk about right now. Because he was right, the playing field wasn't even. There was also the fact that I hadn't even gotten to spend time with my 5th mate yet. But against my better judgment I said, yeah, ask away. Have you already made love to Colton and Reese? Or is it just me and Aidan who have gotten to do that with you? Theo, I really don't think we should talk about this. After the night we'd all just had, the last thing I wanted to deal with was his jealousy. And I knew he was still incredibly jealousy about me sleeping with Aidan. He was obviously speaking to me again, but since that day months ago there was this weird tension between us. It was the elephant in the room that both of us had been ignoring until right now. Then again, maybe it was about time we finally got this talk out of the way. It's just a question. He shrugged, his eyes not moving from mine. I need to know what I'm up against. I turned away from him then. No, I haven't slept with either of them yet. But I plan to when and if the timing is right. I see. He nodded. That seems fair. Does it? I glanced over at him, unsure if he actually meant it or not. Well, before you buy the car, you should probably take it for a spin. And in this case, you'll be driving the car for an eternity. No pressure, I muttered under my breath. Hey, he said, pulling me onto his naked lap. I get it. I actually think you should be with both of them, he told me. We all deserve an even playing field, an equal chance or whatever. But there's just something I want you to remember. What? My eyes darted over to meet his. His blue eyes pierced through mine. I had you first. And even though you don't know it yet, my plan is to have you last. He crushed his lips against mine then, kissing me so intensely and deeply that we were both quickly breathless. I could feel his hard bulge underneath me, and I wanted him. I wanted him more than I had ever wanted him. I ground my body against him, teasing him and letting him know how badly I wanted this. His blue eyes stared deep into mine as he pushed himself inside of me. I let out a loud gasp as I rode him in the water. We shifted positions then, and he pushed me up against the side of the pool. As he thrusted every hard inch into me deeply, I arched my back against the wall of the pool. I could already feel myself tightening, ready to come undone. Theo, I moaned out. He captured my lips in his mouth, biting them gently and groaning into my mouth. Waves of pleasure rippled through me as I shattered all around him. He pushed me up hard against the pool wall as he released himself inside of me. Once he was done, his eyes locked on mine again. That was amazing, but there is one thing that could have made it better. What? I asked. If it had been a full moon. I glanced up at the night sky, noticing that there was no moon visible tonight. At all. I knew what Theo was getting at. If the moon had been full, it would have been an almost guaranteed pregnancy, considering he had just come inside me. And the full moon was a werewolf's fertile time. A part of me was slightly relieved that there hadn't been a full moon because I wasn't ready to make a decision yet. Then again, I suppose that would have been one way for me to make my decision. I could always let fate be the decision maker,